Hi, my name's Evelyn. In this video I will show you how the glowing wetlands picture was created. I will explain all the steps. The footage is split up, so if you're planning on working along, you will have to pause the video from time to time. I'm using GIMP 2.1 on Mac OS. If you're just looking for a quick time-lapse, check out the video I linked to in the description. We start with black background and we will add a new layer. Let's find some blue, greenish and purple colors and just place them down on this new layer. It doesn't matter, it's a matter of taste. We will take the smudge tool. Make sure you take a pretty big and soft brush, and we will just smudge it out so the colors are mixed together in a soft, nice way, just like that. Now we will take a lighter color. That's where the light will shine through the trees later on. It doesn't matter where you place these areas, and just adds a few details. We will then choose a filter, blur, motion blur, and again smudge with the smudge tool just to make it all a bit more interesting. It should be all kind of soft because this is the background for it all. Again, filter, Gaussian blur. Now a new layer, and we will add some black in the center of the picture and at the top, and another Gaussian blur just to make it all soft. We will now copy the upper part, like the upper half of the new layer, copy that and then flip it vertically. That's like the reflection on the water later on. Like that. Let's make another layer, and this will be like the water line, like where the water ends, and we will place the trees and the grasses. Let's place down some brown color. It doesn't have to look good because we will just smudge it out and make it all soft. It's only a background. Like that. Now we will paint the trees on a new layer just with pitch black. Like that. Just placing down a few different trees. Not too many branches. Maybe one like that. Let's also add a few roots. And as you can see, it doesn't have to look good at this point, because basically it's just, it will be pretty much in the background. You won't see any details of these trees. Let's add a few details for the edges, just so it looks a bit natural. Right, now we will add tiny bit of lighter color at the edges. So select the black areas of the trees and just place down some lighter color. This color is on a new layer, and you can just make this layer transparent. I think like 20% or so. Let's just make sure the color sits in the right places. you can use an interesting brush for the eraser tool to give it a bit of structure, but that's a matter of taste. I also add a filter, noise, pick to give it more structure. Now make it transparent. I go down to 30%. Blur it a tiny little bit because it's in the background, so it shouldn't be too defined. And just remove it a tiny little bit at the bottom of the trees. Right, I think that's nice. I'm trying to add a tiny bit more of structure of a brush, but like it's a lot of just trying stuff and see if you can like that, and if you don't like it, just undo or delete the layer, start over again. Like, I think a kind of big part of creating art, like being creative, is trying stuff and see if it looks right or not. Now, I think that's okay. Like the trees are a bit lighter at the edges and darkest in the center. I add a bit more lighter color around the edges. Blur them with a filter. It's in the menu filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And the more you slide the sliders up, the more it will be blurred. I was kind of playing with the colors and the structure and stuff. If you're a beginner, basically you could just roll with all black trees. I merged down the structure layer with the black base, and I duplicate this layer, flip it horizontally, choose a perspective transform, just so they look slightly different, move them around a tiny bit. I copy one of the trees and place it over there. Basically, you just create a few different kinds of trees by copying the trees you made. Make them thicker or thinner. Use perspective transform or normal scaling. It really is a matter of taste. They're just a few different trees. I make one of the more interesting trees kind of big, just so it's like an interesting variety. Let's add a few extra branches, just so the trees don't look too identical. I merge down the layers for these trees. Again, duplicate the layer just to make it easier to get more trees, and just move them a little bit, duplicate it again, and now I have like a different layers with trees that are closer to the camera or farther away. And in general, the ones that are farther away, they should be thinner. The big tree I place right over here. It's a matter of taste, just place it in an interesting place. And now At the very back on a new layer, I will add a few very thin trees, and they're really just background, so they don't need any details. It's just a few trees at the very back to make it all more interesting. A few small branches, like it's broken trees, because like it's a swamp, so the trees might not be too healthy. And I duplicate that layer, flip it again horizontally, and now I need to adjust their brightness. I use colorize, and I make the color lighter and choose a good bluish color. The next layer, that's one step close to the camera, needs a fitting color that's slightly darker. Like the more the background a layer is, the lighter it has to be to almost blend in with the background. Then we just move along to the next layer of trees. Right, actually just add a tiny bit light to the background layer here. Use a motion blur, a Gaussian blur, sorry, just to give it some more light that shines through the trees right here. Use the smudge tool just to make it blend into the background. Now I will take the next layer of trees and take colors, curves, just to change the lightness of that layer. You can just try out if you want to use curves, brightness contrast, colorize, or hue saturation. They all need some kind of a bluish tone. And as mentioned before, check your layers, and like the closer to the camera, the darker the color has to be. So the one big tree I have should be the darkest one, but it shouldn't be completely black, because later on we will have a few trees in the foreground and they will be pretty much all black. I will now take the eraser, take a big brush and a soft brush, and just remove like the ugly edges at the bottom of all the tree layers, so they blend into the soil, like the brown line we created at the beginning. You have to go through all the layers and just make sure they blend in, because we will have like fog and grasses and stuff, so we don't need those hard edges for the roots. We will now place down a few different green colors and black, and then take the smudge tool and choose a brush with dots, and then just make it all spiky, like smudge it out to create some grass, smudge it out to in the direction of the top and the bottom. Then just copy it, and then you can choose this copied element in the brush settings at the top. Now you can just paint with the grass you just made. I use single clicks to place it down, because if you just click once and hold it and just drag, it will be too, the different pieces of grass will be too identical. So just place them down with single clicks, then make the brush a bit smaller, and and place smaller grasses on top of what you just painted. And then I will add some extra where the opacity is down to 20% or 30%, just to make sure it blends into the soil. Just add a few grasses at the edges of the grass you've already painted. Like that, so it will look more natural. Now I will just copy that layer, flip it horizontally, so it looks a bit different, and like create a darker layer. Like I go into hue saturation, reduce the lightness, or you can use the curves as you see here. Usually, as I said before, sometimes it's just about trying out what looks best, but it has to be a bit darker because like this copied layer is like farther away. And I move it down to behind the next layer of the trees. So it's behind the first trees and darker. And pretty much I do that again. I again copy the layer, flip it again so it looks different, move it behind the next layer of trees, and again change the color so it blends more in with the background. You can use lightness contrast, hue saturation, or the curves. Just try it out. I make the colors slightly more bluish. This tends to look fine because the background is bluish. Sometimes I just make the layer boundary size smaller. And now I use the brush again to add something like small bushes on a layer that's one step farther away from the camera again. These will have to be darker and more bluish again, but first I'm just painting them, then I'm using hue saturation and just play around with the color and lightness so I have a tone I think looks correct. Blends in with the background but is still visible. Now again I take the grass brush, I make it pretty big and add a few details. These will be very much in the background, so I make it very transparent, the opacity all the way down to like 20-30%, and that's it at the very back, so it really blends in with the background. It's just a few details that makes it all more interesting. Now we will take some leaves. There's a standard brush that looks like that, but we will change that a bit. We will take the Dodge Burn tool, use the burn setting to make the center part of this brush darker, like that, just to make it more interesting before you use it. Some standard brushes are great in GIMP, but a few are a bit boring. So that one, I kind of like the shape, but I don't like the colors. Make the edges a tiny bit lighter, and when we're happy with it, we will just copy this little bush. And again, just like with the grass, we can use it as a brush and see where we would like to place our small bushes. You can play with the size and the ratio. You just have to try it out. Take a few bigger ones and a few smaller ones in the foreground, just so it looks natural. This really is a lot of trying stuff, using lots of control set, a few very small ones, and in the end, when I'm happy, I can adjust the color scheme and to tone the lightness so it blends in with the rest of the surroundings. Right when I'm happy with the color, I make the layer smaller just to save memory, and I will duplicate it, flip it, and try to transform it a little bit with perspective transform, just to make it more interesting and different, and to get more bushes. Again, crop the layer to save some memory, because we can get lots of layers over time. All the tree layers, just cut them. Now we make a new layer and add some fog. Go down with the opacity to like, I don't know, 20%. I start with a green color for the fog, but again, it's just about playing around with the color settings. See what looks best. If it's like all white, usually doesn't look that good. Let's see if we take a bluish tone or like whatever. I actually went for a yellowish, orange-like tone, but it's very transparent, so you don't see that much of the color at all. And it's possible I will change the color again later on. I take the smudge tool just to give it like a fog structure. Again, just make it look more interesting, more natural. I copy the layer and just move them a bit, layered them on top of each other. Just really, I've actually spent some time on just trying out what looks best. Now we take the standard brush in GIMP for leaves. It's easy to find. We take a color that's almost black, but not entirely. It's a tiny bit of green, but very, very dark. And we just start out by placing a few leaves at the top of the picture. Use different sizes, play with the aspect ratio and the angle, just to make the leaves interesting and natural, so they're not all the same. Just try out what looks right. Don't place too many. For this picture, I don't think it's like more the reflection of the water and stuff that makes this picture come alive, so I don't think it looks good to use too many leaves at the top. Also, just see where I placed the layer for the leaves. Like it's behind the biggest tree, but it's in front of all the other trees for now. Now when I'm happy with the layer, as I tend to do, I will copy it. It's actually the blue symbol at the very bottom. I will make it transparent and flip it horizontally, and then I will place it in the background of my tree line. Like move it all down, the layer all the way down, and just slightly visible, like on 20% opacity or so. So there's some leaves in the background. Now I will merge down all the tree layers, all the leaf layers, and the soil, the soil line. Then I can duplicate that layer, like the merged layer, flip it vertically, and I have the reflection on the water. I make it slightly opaque, like transparent, but not completely. I still kept the big tree on a separate layer, so I will have to copy and flip that one separately. It's just so I can adjust the color more precisely. Usually a reflection on water is slightly darker, so again I'm just playing with colors. I'm also scaling the reflection part a tiny bit, only the height. And as you can see, it's slightly dark, but not too much. I will adjust that quite a lot later on, but for now I'm just trying to get like a darker tone that looks about right. Just place a big tree correctly. Scale it down a bit, the height. I sometimes make a copy of a layer I want to keep as backup just in case I mess something up, and we'll need to restore that layer. What I'm trying here is like I would like to add a tiny bit of blur at the bottom. I found it easiest to just select the lowest part, use selection feather, like with 200 pixels, and then use a filter blur, Gaussian blur on this lowest part, just to make the bottom line tiny bit blurred. I now take the standard Ivy brush from GIMP, use dynamics random just to place down some leaves that will be floating in the water. The closer to the soil line, like to the trees, the smaller they should be. The closer to the camera, the bigger the leaves are. Just make a few spots, a few islands with leaves, and then I will use a perspective transform to make the leaves close to the camera bigger and the ones at the back smaller, so it looks like the correct perspective. I copy it, flip it, just try out what would look nice. So I have some interesting formations of leaves in the water, and copy it again, scale it all the way down, place them close to the soil. They're far away, so they should be pretty small, like that. Copy them, so we have some right here, and one more. Copy that again, and some more right here. Also place some of the small ones underneath a few of the big ones. It's really a lot about just trying stuff out. When you're happy with it, just merge all the layers you've created. Use colors, hue, saturation, or curves, or whatever you prefer, and adjust the colors so it fits in. right? I make it a bit darker and a bit more bluish. I also try to copy the layer again, make it much darker, so I have like an extra layer with leaves that is much darker and gives me like a shade underneath them. I also blur that shadow layer tiny bit to make it more natural, and use a filter with a motion blur. Just move that shadow layer around so it looks right and nice. Adjust the tone and the lightness of the background layer a tiny bit. The curves. You can also try to use contrast or lightness, just whatever you prefer to use. Now I make a new layer in the foreground and I use black and a big brush to create two like islands right in front of the camera. Another layer, and let's create a tree. You can take like a kind of big brush, make sure the edge is kind of sharp. Add a few branches and some details. It's all about just trying stuff and make the tree look natural. If you're not experienced with trees, just find a few pictures on the internet and look at what trees look like. Basically, they're trees in all sizes and shapes, but some people just feel more comfortable having a reference they can work with. If you set the rate for the smudge tool to 100%, you can pretty much just move the color around, like it won't disappear when you smudge it out. And I often use that with a very hard brush to add details from something I've already painted. And that's what I'm doing here. Like I have the smudge tool with rate on 100, and I just pull out extra branches and details. Again, this is a swamp, so the trees are not too healthy, and there are quite a few branches that are dead and broken off. You can actually spend quite a lot of time on trying different things, like adding and removing branches, stuff like that. Sometimes if I'm not happy with something I made at all, like it's far too big or far too small, I also use the perspective transform tool or scale it. I make another layer underneath that first tree and add a smaller tree right next to it, and my plan is to have like a big branch going right here, so the bigger tree is in front of that one. Again, I took a brush first, and then I'm using the smudge tool with rate 100 to add details, small branches, and like a bark structure at the edges. When I'm done with this smaller tree, in the end I'm planning on copying that, because I think like the other island in the opposite edge corner, I would like to have something there too. But now I will take my grass again, copy it, use it as a brush, make it kind of big because it's close to the camera, and again just lightly, click by click, add the grass on top of these islands. Make the brush a bit smaller just to give it some more structure and variety. And then we will take a big soft brush with the eraser tool and make it blend into the dark background of the islands. I will copy that layer, make it darker or lighter. I'll just try that. Yeah, place it in front of that, make it slightly transparent, a bit darker, more yellowish, bluish. It's really about just trying out different shades and see what looks right. I'm using the perspective tool, perspective transform, just so the grasses point into a different direction and it's more natural. I copy the grass layer again, give it a lighter and slightly more yellowish color, and place it underneath the other grasses so the very tips of that are lighter. Now I copy this smaller tree, flip it, take the perspective transform tool, cut the layer size, again perspective just to make it look different so they don't look too identical, and place it down in that corner of the picture. It's still too similar, so I will take the smudge tool with rate on 100 and just change the branches a tiny bit so it looks different than the first tree I made. I had a tiny piece of video that was corrupted, so I made that that piece of wood that's floating in the water, and I actually can't show you how it was made. Sorry about that. I used the smudge tool again to create like a water structure on the water, like it just smudge from left to right a few times, just try it out, and you have like small waves on the water surface. Don't place it all over, just in a few spots, so it looks natural. I guess less is more right here. It's just so it looks like liquid and interesting. Here I'm removing a tiny bit of the fog because I think it covers the water and the small waves that just made too much. Again, it's just about trying out a few things and see what looks best. You can use the eraser or the smudge tool with a very soft brush. Now I'm going to paint the mushrooms. I take a very intense orange color to start with. I paint the basic shape of the mushroom. They're pretty small, the pictures, so they don't have to be too detailed. I then use a darker red color. Set the opacity of the brush down to about 20% and just add the darker spots on the mushroom. Then I take a light yellow color and again with opacity about 20% add the lighter areas of the mushroom, and it's like the tip that's lightest, that will be glowing. I use the smudge tool to just blend all the colors so I have like a gradient. I make it all smooth, and then I need a very light yellow color just to define the place where the mushroom is glowing, like that. Again, the smudge tool to just blend all the colors. And the smudge tool with 100 to just clean up the edges of the mushroom. When I'm done, I can copy, like select the mushroom, copy it, and then I can use it as a brush. Just adjusting the contrast a tiny bit here so it looks more glowing. And then copy the mushroom, make a new layer for the mushrooms and choose the mushroom in the brush selection. Now you can just play around with the angle, the size, the aspect ratio, and start painting these mushrooms. Again, the closer to the camera they are, the bigger they should be. Of course, there is some kind of variety, but in general, the closer to the camera they are, the bigger they look. So, right here, on the other side of the water, they will be kind of small. But I will also add a few tiny mushrooms. They are far away or just a few young ones. Don't place them all over, try to place them in small groups and make sure you mix the different sizes while still making sure they tend to be bigger closer to the camera. It doesn't look that natural yet because it looks like they're just placed on top of the grass, but we will fix that later. Right now it's just about placing them. As you can see now, I will take the eraser tool and just remove the lowest part of the mushrooms so they blend more in. And we will even add something more. Just take a very soft brush for the eraser tool and carefully erase the very lowest part of the mushrooms. Now we take the grass again, choose the grass brush, but use it as an eraser, and if you just erase a grass-shaped spot of the mushroom, it looks as if there are a few grass blades covering up the lowest part of the mushrooms, and it really looks as if the mushrooms are growing inside of the grass. Now I'm using a round brush with a black color, and I changed the aspect ratio so I have like a shape that looks a bit like small islands in the water, and I add them on a separate layer. Just watch where the layer is placed, right on top of the water layer. And this is pretty much because I would like to have like give the impression of a few spots where the water is not that deep, and a few mushrooms can grow right underneath the leaves I have floating on the water. They're not entirely black, they're a tiny bit brownish. You can just try to add a few details and smudge it out a tiny bit. It really is just something in the background. They can be kind of transparent. It just have to be like a few darker spots. You still have the leaves on top of it. I also add some grasses with the grass brush, because probably on top of these small islands there will be some grass. It's like a swampland, right? Now I will take you can take the mushroom brush again, or you can do as I do right here. I'm taking the clone tool and I just clone a few of the groups of mushrooms, so I can place so I don't have to place the mushrooms separately, but can just copy a whole group of mushrooms to add a few more on the small islands I just created. It's just so it's a bit faster because you can place more at once and you don't have to design a small group again. As you can see, again, it's a lot about trying what looks right. I use undo so much all the time. I think it's a normal part of the creative process. Just try stuff and just place the mushrooms until it looks right. The mushrooms farthest away, I made them slightly more transparent, erased them a tiny bit, and I also made them a bit darker, like a tiny bit more reddish, just because they are behind this fog we have. And now copy the layer with all the mushrooms and use a filter, blur, Gaussian blur. The copied one, the blurred layer, has to be below the normal mushroom layer. This blurred spot in front of the camera, I have to blur twice, so it's a bit bigger. And you can see it looks like the mushrooms are glowing now, like a shine. I now take a normal brush and in orange color I use an aspect ratio of 18, which makes the brush look like a small line, and I can add small lines in the water, and this will look like the reflection of this yellowish orange light the mushrooms are spreading, and it's like reflecting in the small waves we have there. Again, try it out, use undo lots of times. Doesn't have to look perfect, it's just about adding some color in the right places. Erase the edges, the left and right side of these lines a tiny bit, so it blends more in with the water. And now I will duplicate that layer, move it up a tiny bit, so I have two layers that overlap, and both the two layers should have an opacity of about 20%, and it will look really nice. Now I will copy the front tree layer, like the dark black silhouettes we have. Then I will use colorize, make them lighter, and make sure they get like a orange color. Move them a bit so it sticks out from underneath the black layer. And I do that with the big tree too. Copy it, colorize, make it a bit lighter, change the tone, the hue, and the saturation so we have a orange tone. This is like the light from the mushrooms that will fall onto the trees. Of course, that doesn't look too natural right now. I will also use like the perspective tools so it sticks out in the right places, like into the direction of the mushrooms. Now it looks a bit artificial, it doesn't look natural, so we'll have to take the eraser and erase the orange shine where there shouldn't be any light from the mushrooms. Like, just use common sense. Like, if you see the orange mushrooms are at the bottom, so the light will shine up. So at the very top there shouldn't be much light, and the stuff that points away from the light shouldn't be hit, and there shouldn't be any orange edge there. So just remove the shine in a few places so it looks more natural. And of course we will need to do the same with the smaller trees that are still on a separate layer. Again, the same strategy. And I will also add a little shine on this piece of wood that floats in the water, because there will be a tiny shine on that part too. Just take an interesting brush, add a small pattern, and just erase the parts where there shouldn't be any light. This is tiny detail. You can just skip that if you like, it will still look good. Now I will take the leaves brush again with the black color, and I will add a few leaves on this big tree. So it's a few leaves you can see very close to the camera, so they should be kind of big. Again, just try it out, use undo a lot, use different sizes, play with the angle and the aspect ratio, and just make sure it looks interesting, natural and nice. Now I add a tiny bit of structure on the trees. This will be almost invisible later on. It's just a tiny bit of structure that looks like bark, so it's not just like a completely black area for the trees. So I just use a new layer, an interesting brush, like a 40% opacity, place it all over, and then just erase the edges so this spark pattern is only in the center of the trees, so it looks as if they're round. I will also copy that layer, make it transparent first. Now you can see it's almost not visible anymore. It's like all down to 18% or so. Then we'll duplicate it and move it a bit so they overlap, and it just makes the pattern more interesting and more natural. Now I take a eraser with a big brush with a pattern just to erase a few parts of that bark pattern I just made to give it some extra structure. But as you can see, it's almost not visible. It's really just a very tiny detail. I merged down all the trees now, duplicated it, and again used colorize, make it lighter and orange. It's because I've erased so many parts that I had to fill out all the orange area behind the black. I now take the swatch tool, not on 100 rate, but down to, I think I'm on about 60, and I use a brush with some structure, doesn't matter which one. And I'm just like scratching away parts of the black layer so more of the orange layer is visible. This is just to so the orange light looks as if it falls onto bark which has some structure. If you don't do that, it looks as if the tree was like a completely even and smooth object, and trees are not. They have some structure. So by just smudging away the edges of the black layer, we make some more of the orange stuff visible, and it looks more interesting and more natural, and it also looks as if the orange color has different tones, like where it's only visible tiny bit, it looks more reddish, and it just looks so much nicer. Again, this is about trying stuff out, just see what looks best. Try again, undo, maybe make a copy of the layer first so you can try it and delete the layer again and use the backup. This is a lot about experience, so just see where it goes. I copy that glowing layer, blur it to create like a shine, change the tone a tiny bit, and use the perspective tool so the shine is into the direction of the glowing mushrooms. I erase the parts that point away from the light. And again, that's just to make it look more natural. I merged down all the mushrooms and the glow and stuff like that. And I select areas around the mushrooms. Again, that's for the shine. I use selection feather, and I just change the color tone of the areas around the mushrooms a tiny bit, make them a tiny bit reddish, so it looks as if the light from the mushrooms actually has an effect on the surface where the mushrooms are growing. I also copy the grass layer at the bottom, make it all orange, and place it behind the real grass. Bit more yellowish, and I erase the part close to the camera so it looks as if there's light falling onto the tips of the grass. That's it. That's pretty easy. Now I can flatten the image. This means I will combine all the layers and I have my final pictures. I make a few copies of that picture, but only keep the topmost layer. And I'm actually not too happy with the size of the picture. I think it has to be a bit more, the width has to be bigger. And I'm trying to copy a part of the picture. I can't see it, so that's through the dark tree. And just scale this one part make this tree a bit thinner, use the perspective transform tool, and I will use the crop tool. Change it a bit again, like that looks right. And I will crop the picture. That looks much better. It's still too high, so I will scale the whole picture down a tiny bit. Much better. And now I will just make final adjustments. I use color curves to adjust contrast. I use the color balance. Again, this is a lot about just trying stuff. Make sure the shadows, the highlights and stuff have the right tone and look nice. I think it was like 10 minutes where I just tried different things. I clipped a few parts of the video, so it looks much shorter, but it really is about trying stuff. As mentioned before, this is a part of the creative process, so don't worry if you use undo all the time. That's normal. It's just a part of it. Now I take hue saturation again, just to make final adjustments and get the very best result, because I'm pretty much done now. It really is details and the last adjustments. Bit darker, bit lighter, like that. The curves can be really useful. I would recommend you play with them. Many people that are not that experienced, they don't understand how the curves work. But maybe watch a tutorial or read up into the documentation. It really is a great tool, very powerful. I scaled the lower part of the picture a bit just to adjust the composition, and crop the picture again, and now I'm pretty much done. Remember to save a lot all the time so you don't lose any progress. Also watch what layer you are working on. As a last thing, I will adjust some of the light on the trees. The ones pointing away from the mushrooms have to be a bit more dull, and I also add a few mushrooms that have a slightly different tone just to make it more interesting. And this is pretty much it. And I think it turned out really nice. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet.